Montana Territory, October 1879. The wind screamed down through Silvertooth Pass, slicing between the Bitterroot Mountains like a blade that never dulled. Beneath the towering peaks, nestled among frost-burnt pines and soot-stained rocks, the mining town of Bitter Hollow sprawled in defiance of the land around it. Built by rough hands and tougher hearts, the town smelled of horse sweat, sour whiskey, and wood smoke soaked deep into the bones of every building. Under the sagging awning of Milton's livery, a crude corral had been hammered together overnight with crooked boards and rusting nails. The crowd was thick miners, ranchers, drifters, and a few grim-faced soldiers. Some leaned on rifles. Most just crossed their arms and spat into the mud. "Step back, you damn idiots," barked the auctioneer, a red-faced man with a chest like a barrel and a voice rougher than sandpaper. "This ain't no pet show. You want a prize or a corpse?" The murmurs turned sour as the crowd looked toward the pen. She stood barefoot in the sludge, her wrists bound with iron-dried blood crusted across her brow. Her dark hair was tangled with pine needles and dirt. Her dress, if it could be called that, was torn at one shoulder, stained with sweat and old bruises. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She just stared through the crowd like they were already ghosts. "Captured north of the border," the auctioneer announced, holding up a damp scrap of paper. "Comanche. Dangerous. Bit a man's ear off 3 nights ago. Army says they don't want her in their jails. She's yours for $30. Cheap." Hell, someone laughed darkly. "You'd be better off selling her for meat." "She's cursed," another muttered. "I heard her howl like a wolf last night." The murmur rose again, thick with disgust and fear. Silas Boone hadn't come for any of this. The widowed rancher stood near the back of the crowd, his long coat dusted with trail grit, his hat pulled low. He'd ridden in for supplies, needed a new bridle and salt for the feed. But as he turned to leave, a sound pierced the cold air. Not a scream. A cry, raw and primal, ripped from the woman's chest. It wasn't human. It was older, deeper, like the wind howling through the bones of the earth. One of the horses reared in its hitching post. Silas's mare jerked hard against the reins. Every conversation around the pen died in a heartbeat. Silas turned back, and then he saw her eyes. Not the chains, not the bruises. Just her eyes, fierce, hollow, burning. The same look Clara had the night she died in his arms. The auctioneer cleared his throat, voice strained now. "Last call. $30. Anyone." Silence. Then a voice, low and certain, $35. Heads turned. The crowd parted slightly as Silas stepped forward. "You crazy," someone shouted. "She'll cut your throat in your sleep. She ain't an animal," Silas said, eyes fixed on the woman. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, she don't speak English. We don't even know her name." "She don't need to speak," Silas replied. "She just needs to breathe." The woman tilted her head slightly. She didn't thank him, didn't soften. But something moved behind her eyes, a flicker dry and bitter as dust. Maybe a smirk, maybe just a twitch. The auctioneer slammed his ledger shut. "Sold to the gentleman with the death wish." 2 hired men moved toward the pen to unchain her. "Don't touch her," Silas said quietly. They paused. He stepped into the pen himself. The woman didn't move. Taking the key from the auctioneer's hand, Silas knelt and unlocked her cuffs without a word. When the final shackle fell to the mud, she stepped past him without so much as a glance. Barefoot, she walked from the pen into the muddy street. He followed. At the edge of the square, Silas took a rope from his saddlebag and looped it loosely around her wrists, not tight, just enough to guide. She didn't resist. As they walked toward the trail out of town, a drunk called out, "You'll be dead by morning, cowboy." Silas said nothing, but the woman did. She turned just enough to let her words drift through the smoke-filled air. In my tongue, she said, voice like gravel and thunder, we do not waste blades on ghosts. Then she faced forward again, and the two of them disappeared into the trees, leaving behind the town, the jeers, and the shackles. They followed no road, just a trail worn into the hills by elk hooves, wagon wheels, and long-forgotten boots. Pine needles softened every step. The mountain air cut cold and clean through Silas's lungs, but he barely noticed. He led the mare with one hand, the other loosely holding the rope tied around the woman's wrists. She kept pace behind him, barefoot, on frost-stiffened dirt, her head held high, like chains were still dragging behind her in spirit. She hadn't said a word since leaving town. He hadn't either. By the time the sun sank behind the ridge, the first fingers of winter curled through the timber. Silas's ranch sat quiet on the shoulder of a broad valley, an old cabin, a leaning barn, and fences that had been mended too many times. The cottonwoods nearby had already lost their leaves. Smoke curled from the chimney pale and thin, like even the fire inside was tired. Silas stopped by the gate and turned to her. "You'll sleep in the barn," he said plainly. "There's hay. It's dry." She said nothing, just stared at the cabin behind him, her expression unreadable. "I don't own people," he added after a moment. "You're not a prisoner here. But if you bring trouble down on this place, I'll send you back to the ones who put iron on your wrists." At last she spoke. "I am not yours." Her voice was cracked low but clear, like someone who had once spoken with force and had nearly forgotten how. "I know," Silas said quietly, "but the wolves don't care whose bones they find." He handed her a wool blanket. She took it without looking at him and walked toward the barn, not waiting for another word. Silas watched her go. She moved with the kind of silence that comes only from growing up in a world where noise could get you killed. Inside the cabin, he lit a lantern and fed the fire. Warmth crept into the room slowly. He hung his coat, then stood at the mantel. Clara's photograph rested in its old place, her smiling face framed by curls and sunlight. He touched the frame. His thumb brushed across her cheek. He could still hear her voice sometimes, especially on nights like this. Snow coming. The trees stiff in the wind. The kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Clara used to say strange things in moments like these. Things that didn't make sense at the time. Even wild things she'd whispered once, curled beneath a blanket beside the fire, come home when they love. He'd laughed then. He hadn't understood. He wasn't laughing now. Outside, the wind shifted. A faint light flickered in the cracks of the barn. She was awake. He stepped onto the porch and squinted toward the broken boards. A lantern glowed near the stall. Curiosity tugged him off the steps and across the dirt yard. He peered through a gap in the wood. She sat beside the mare, cleaning a gash across her collarbone with water from a wooden pail. Her tunic had slipped to one side, revealing scars along her shoulder, some fresh others, aged and jagged. But it wasn't the wounds that stopped him. It was the ink. Etched in faded blue, curving across her shoulder, was the image of a cedar tree with a rising sun behind it. He'd seen that symbol before. Years ago, in one of Clara's old books, a study of Comanche symbology. That marking meant royal blood, warrior blood. It was a chieftain's crest, passed down through daughters who never surrendered. She looked up. Their eyes met again. "You fought in the war?" she asked suddenly, her voice sharp with English now. Silas straightened. "I did." She dipped the cloth back into the water. "So did I." I was 12 when they burned our winter camp," she said. "I fought with silence, with memory, not with bullets." She stood, brushing hay from her skirt. "You think you bought me," she said, her voice flat now, "but I was never for sale." "I don't think you're a savage," Silas said. She didn't smile, didn't soften. "I am the daughter of Hawkshield," she said, "granddaughter of the fire seer. I led my people across the river before your men came with fire." Silas stepped back. "You're not a prisoner." "No," she said. "I'm what your people feared most, a woman who remembers." Then she turned and walked deeper into the barn, the light swallowing her shadow. Silas stood in the cold heart, pounding. He'd brought her here thinking she was broken, beaten, alone. But now he saw her clearly. He hadn't brought home something fragile. He'd brought home something dangerous, something sacred, and something that had already survived the end of the world once. By early November, winter bled into the land like a secret too heavy to keep. The sun rose late and left early, and frost gathered on the cabin windows like lace spun by ghosts. Silas moved slower than usual, his legs stiff from an old war injury. But it wasn't pain that kept him restless. It was her, the woman he still hadn't named aloud, the one who moved through his land like a shadow born from the trees. She rose before dawn, vanishing into the forest with a bough across her back, and returned before midday, always leaving something behind. A skinned rabbit laid gently on the porch steps, a pouch of pine sap for cracked hands. Once, venison strung from a birch branch hung like an offering. She never knocked, never spoke. Silas stopped asking why. One morning, after she disappeared into the woods again, he followed her trail out of habit more than suspicion. Her bare footprints barely left an imprint on the frost-covered ground, but he could read them, careful, deliberate, no wasted steps. She moved like she belonged to the earth, not the world of men. He followed as far as the edge of the ridge, but stopped when he heard it. A rhythm. Not song, not speech. Movement. Slow, steady bare feet tapping against frozen earth. He crouched behind a pine and saw her in the clearing. She was dancing. Not for an audience, not for grace. For something older. Her arms moved in wide arcs, her body turning in slow practice steps. Her voice carried softly chanting in a language Silas didn't know, but somehow recognized. It stirred something inside him, deep and quiet. She wasn't performing. She was remembering. That night, clouds rolled in and snow came hard. By morning, the land was blanketed white. Silas stepped outside to break ice from the troughs. When it happened, his boot hit a patch of black frost near the corral. He fell, hard. The sound of his leg snapping was sharp and wet, followed by a blinding wave of pain. He lay there in the snow, half-buried teeth clenched, vision narrowing. She came like wind. He didn't hear her. He just felt her hands already working, eyes sharp. She knelt, cut the boot-free packed snow around the fracture, and dragged him toward the barn with strength he didn't know she had. By the time he faded in and out, a fire was already burning inside. She brewed herbs, wrapped the leg, whispered something in Comanche under her breath. When he cried out as she reset the bone, she didn't flinch. When it was done, she placed a damp cloth on his brow and sat beside him. "Do not die," she said. Her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. His lips cracked. "Why?" She hesitated. Then her hand found his weathered fingers touching calloused skin. "Because you remind me of her," she whispered. "The woman in the snow. I heard her once. She sang." Silas's heart pounded. What did she say? Her eyes flickered, and then she spoke. "Even wild things come home when they love." The words hit him like thunder. He stared at her lips parted. Where did you hear that he breathed? She looked down, not answering at first. She told the wind, she finally said, and the wind carried it to me. And in that moment, Silas Boone, who hadn't wept in 5 years, let the tears come. Not just for Clara, not just for the pain, but for the strange, impossible truth he had no words for. In the days that followed, something between them softened. She left smoked fish at the door. He left bread wrapped in linen. They didn't thank each other. They didn't have to. Each act said more than words ever could. One morning, she waited outside the barn with an axe in hand. "Fence is weak," she said. "I fix." He nodded and handed her another. They worked side by side, hammering posts through frozen soil. He noticed her palms were blistered and without comment offered her his old gloves. She took them. No pride, no protest. That evening he sat on the porch, carving a spoon from birch. She came and sat beside him, said nothing, just watched. "You ever learn English?" he asked. She shrugged. "Some, from her, from Clara. She never told you." Silas shook his head slowly. "She taught me 3 words Tahoma said, want, strong, home." He didn't know what to say. Instead, he handed her the spoon. She turned it in her hands like it was made of gold. And for the first time she smiled. Just a little. The snow thickened by the day. Bitter winds howled through the trees, and the porch steps creaked under frost. But inside the cabin, the air was finally warm. Not just from firewood or boiling stew, but from something else. Something human. They didn't speak often. But silence no longer felt like a wall. It hung around them like a quilt stitched by survival, softened by trust. Silas still didn't know her name. She had never offered it, and he'd never asked again. But he called her you, and somehow that was enough. One night, she placed a bundle of dried herbs beside his bed. "For pain," she said, "and for dreams." He met her gaze across the firelight. "You always carry medicine." "I carry memory," she said simply. "My mother taught me that healing comes from what survives." Silas nodded slowly, then turned back to the fire. He thought of Clara, how she had once said something similar after binding a calf's leg with strips of her apron. Even wild things she'd whispered as the snow fell outside come home when they love. The words returned now, uninvited but welcome. He reached for the harmonica that had sat untouched for years. Clara's. The metal was cold in his hands. From the barn he heard footsteps. She had not gone to sleep yet. Later that night, as the storm rattled the windows, he heard it faint, uncertain, but unmistakable. A melody. Not perfect, not practiced, but full of memory. He stepped quietly to the open door of the barn. There she sat, legs crossed before a flickering fire, the harmonica cradled in her hands. She was playing Clara's lullaby, the same one Clara had played the night before their wedding, when she whispered her name into his chest like a secret. Now that song drifted through the wind again, through fingers that had never known Clara's touch, yet somehow carried her rhythm. Silas didn't speak. He sank to the ground outside the barn wall, trembling. Tears came fast and sharp. He buried his face in his hands. She didn't stop playing. When the fire burned low, she came to him. She didn't ask what the tears were for. She simply knelt, pulled an old blanket over his shoulders and tucked it beneath his chin, just like Clara used to. Then, in a voice softer than breath, she whispered, "Even wild things come home when they love." His eyes snapped open. He grabbed her wrist, eyes wild. "Where did you hear that?" She didn't flinch, but her voice carried something almost like a smile. "You asked the wind too many questions," she said gently. Then, without waiting for his reply, she rose and walked into the snow. The next day passed heavy with silence, not the kind they'd grown used to. This silence buzzed, pressed on his chest, pulled at old wounds, and finally that afternoon she broke it. They sat under the cottonwoods again, watching the fog roll across the distant hills like a slow-moving river. She held a small pouch in her lap. "You never asked," she said. Silas turned toward her. "Asked what?" "My name." He swallowed. "I figured if you wanted me to know it, you'd tell me." She nodded once. "Ayasha," she said. "It means little one who returns." "Seems fittin'," he said. "You've returned more than most." "I also remember more than most," she added, pulling a length of leather from the pouch. It held a bone-carved ring, Clara's. "Where did you get that?" Silas asked, voice cracking. "She gave it to me. Long ago, near the Missouri. I was 10. My mother was dying. We had no food. I followed a sound music. She was sitting by the river playing this." She nodded toward the harmonica. "She fed me, spoke gently, said I had a strong voice, said if I didn't name what I wanted, men would name it for me." Silas's heart thudded. "She gave me this ring," Ayasha continued. "Said I would know when it was time to return it." "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered. "She wasn't yours yet," Ayasha said softly. "She belonged to the wind, and the wind gave her to us. Just for a while." Silas stared at the ring still caught in her fingers. It was Clara's, but now it was something more. It was a thread, a promise that somehow connected him to a woman he had loved and to the one sitting beside him now. Ayasha placed the ring on the wooden step between them. "You can take it," she said, "or not. It was never mine to keep." Silas didn't move. Instead, he looked at her and said the only thing he could. "Thank you for bringing her back." Ayasha met his gaze. "I didn't bring her back," she said. "She brought me to you." The peace they'd built was fragile like snow on early spring ground. Beautiful, but never safe. So, when the stranger rode in dust, trailing behind a sleek gray horse, Silas knew something had changed. He stood on the porch as the rider approached. The man wore clean military coat boots shined too bright for mountain roads. He dismounted with precision and arrogance, removing a folded paper from his saddlebag before offering his hand. "Lieutenant Bram Caldwell," he said the words crisp. "U.S. Army." Silas didn't shake it. "What do you want?" "I believe you've been harboring a fugitive," Caldwell said, sliding the paper open. "Ayasha of the Comanche, accused of murdering 2 soldiers near Bitter Creek, escaped custody months ago." The name hit like a hammer. Ayasha stepped from around the cabin just as Caldwell continued. "I'm not here for the bounty. I'm here for justice." "She's no killer," Silas said immediately. Caldwell lifted an eyebrow. "You know her whole story." "I know enough." The lieutenant took a slow step forward. "You think she's some wildflower you've tamed out here? One of the men she killed was just 18. Ayasha's fists tightened, but she said nothing. "She defended her land," Silas said. "Same as you'd do. The law doesn't bend for ghosts or savages," Caldwell said flatly, pulling a pair of shackles from his coat. "Now, step aside." Silas didn't move. "She's not going anywhere." Caldwell's smile vanished. His hand drifted to his holster. "That your final answer?" Before Silas could speak, Ayasha stepped forward. "Enough." She held out her wrists. "I'll go." Silas turned to her, sharp and pained. "You don't have to run." "I'm not running," she said. "I'm ending it." Caldwell grinned and moved toward her. But in a blink, Ayasha twisted, spun, and bolted for the trees. "Stop!" Caldwell shouted, drawing his revolver. "No," Silas roared. The shot cracked through the mountain air. Ayasha dropped hard into the snow, clutching her shoulder, red blooming across the buckskin. Silas ran to her. "Ayasha." "I'm fine," she hissed. "It's not deep." Caldwell approached, gun raised. "She's lucky I don't miss." Silas stood and stepped in front of her. "Put it down," he growled. "You going to shoot a federal officer, cowboy?" Caldwell sneered. "No," Silas said, "but I'll bury one." Behind them the sound of footsteps rose, neighbors, ranchers, Lakota, boys, townsfolk, some with rifles, some with pitchforks, all with eyes fixed on Caldwell. The balance shifted. Rain began to fall soft but steady. Silas hoisted Ayasha onto his mare, climbed up behind her, and whispered into the horse's ear, "One more ridge." They rode hard into the timber. Behind them, Caldwell cursed and mounted his own horse, barking orders. Gunfire echoed through the forest. Ayesha clung to Silas' blood warm against his side. He veered off the main trail through bramble and thorns until a stone ledge opened into a hidden cave behind the cedars. He half carried her through the mouth, where silence and shadow swallowed them whole. Inside, the fire came slow. His hands shook. Her breathing grew shallow. She opened her eyes and looked around the cave walls etched with circles, lines, and markings older than memory. "This is where my mother prayed," she whispered. Silas paused, staring at the fading symbols. "It's beautiful," she said. "The cave hears what the sky forgets." Ayesha said, pulling a small bundle from her pouch feathers ash and a carved wolf. "It's for death," she said, "or return." "Don't talk like that," he said, dropping beside her. "There's a prophecy," she murmured, fingers brushing his chest. "When the man remembers the breath of the mountain, the dead will rise again." He didn't understand, but he believed her. Gunfire rang again. Silas ducked instinctively. Shadows shifted beyond the cave mouth. Caldwell's voice echoed. "You give me the girl, I give you mercy. Keep her, and I give you death." Silas looked at his revolver. Then he looked at Ayesha. He handed her the bow. "Can you still shoot?" She took it without hesitation. "I never stopped." They moved like ghosts through the trees, she to the ridge, he to the clearing, leading Caldwell's men off trail. When Silas stepped into the open, bullets ripped toward him. One grazed his arm. Another tore through his side. He stumbled, fell. Ayesha's scream tore the sky. From above, arrows rained down. Caldwell's men fell into chaos. Ayesha emerged from the trees like lightning, loosed an arrow that struck Caldwell square in the chest. He stumbled. Another arrow hit his thigh. He fell backward into the mud. Ayesha dropped beside Silas. "No," she whispered, "stay with me." His blood soaked through his shirt. His breath was thin. "You're the wild thing," he whispered, "and I came home." Tears streamed down her face. "You're not dying," she said, voice breaking. He smiled faintly. "Then pray, little wolf, pray the mountain remembers me." Silas floated through darkness. Not pain, not cold, just weightlessness like drifting in the belly of a storm. Voices rose and fell around him, not English, not words. Chanting, like wind on canyon walls. Somewhere far off he felt fire, smelled cedar, then breath his own shallow but real. He opened his eyes slowly. Above him, smoke drifted through a narrow hole in a hide-covered roof. The air was thick with sage. Painted faces hovered nearby, Comanche women murmuring prayers, pressing poultices to his side. And beside him, Ayesha. Her face was streaked with ash. Her hair loose over her shoulders. Her hands trembled as they hovered above his chest, whispering in Comanche. She didn't see him wake. Not at first. Then she said his wife's name, soft, reverent. "Clara, if you walk with the wind, walk here. If your fire still burns, let it touch him. You brought me to him. Don't take him back." Silas's throat burned. He moved his fingers, reached for her hand. Her eyes snapped open. "Silas," she breathed, grasping his fingers like they were a thread between life and death. "You prayed to her," he rasped. Ayesha nodded slowly. "She was the bridge. She saved us both." The other women drifted away like smoke. "You should have run," he whispered. "I did once," she replied. "Never again." He coughed, then smiled weakly. "You believed I'd live. I believed in the cedar." They sat in stillness. Just the fire between them. Just the sound of rain on hide and heartbeat in their ears. "How long?" he finally asked. 3 days. Your blood stopped because the herbs sealed it. The old women say, you're part mountain now. He chuckled hoarsely. Mountain don't bleed this much. She tilted her head, but it remembers. He looked around. Your people. Some. We live far quiet, but when the cedar burns, we come. He stared into the flame. She burned cedar, he murmured. Clara. She was listening, Ayesha said. Before you. Before me. Silas blinked against the light. You brought me back. She touched his cheek gently. I brought you home. His voice cracked. You are my home. Ayesha's breath caught. Her whole life she had been claimed only by chains, by men, by war. This was different. This was sacred. No more running, he whispered. No more ghosts, she answered. And the fire burned steady. No smoke, just warmth, just life. That spring they built a new cabin together. The old one had been lost to fire during a lightning storm, but neither of them mourned it. They found a ridge farther north where the trees parted to show the wide valley below. They hauled stone-felled pine, hammered every nail with their own hands. No locks on the doors, no fences on the land, just sky and cedar smoke. In town, people talked. The Comanche woman who walked free, the rancher who'd stood against the army. But words grew soft with time. Ayesha never asked to be accepted. She simply lived. Each morning, she walked to the small schoolhouse with a satchel of herbs and hand-carved toys. The children, white native orphaned, ran to meet her. She taught them stories, not from books, from earth, from trees, from the wind. Silas watched her from the porch, a blanket on his knees, coffee in his hand. His side still ached on cold mornings. The scar reminded him of the price he'd paid, and of everything he'd been given in return. He read Clara's journals now, not with grief, with gratitude. Her sketches of tribal symbols, her words about silence, her belief in stories. She had seen beauty in the forgotten. And she had been right. Clara had walked with the wind and brought him Ayesha. He no longer spoke to Clara's photograph. He didn't need to, because in Ayesha's laughter, Clara lived on. In the scent of cedar, Clara blessed them. In the heartbeat of a quiet house on a high ridge, Clara forgave him for surviving. And Ayesha, she smiled more now. She danced in the yard when the rain came warm. She sang to the trees and wove thread into old cloth. And every night she placed a sprig of sage by the fire. Not for ghosts, for memory. They married in the spring, quietly, without fanfare. No preacher, no church, just the two of them beneath the cottonwoods surrounded by neighbors who had once watched from afar. Now, stand in close hands, folded heads bowed in quiet respect. Ayesha wore a dress she'd sewn from softened deer hide stitched with strands of Clara's old lace. Around her neck hung the bone-carved ring Clara had once given her. Silas wore his father's old coat and a leather band Ayesha had braided from cedar bark. The wedding took place beside the creek where Clara had planted sunflowers long ago. Now they bloomed like golden memory across the bank. The old Lakota woman who had helped tend Silas's wounds offered a blessing in both languages. Ayesha's voice trembled slightly as she whispered, "Even wild things." Silas smiled, finishing the vow for her. Come home when they love. They kissed beneath a sky scrubbed clean by rain. And for the first time in a long, long while, it felt like the mountain itself breathed with them. That summer, their son was born. They named him Cedar. He had Ayesha's calm gaze and Silas's stubborn jaw. He laughed easily, cried rarely, and took his first steps straight into a cold stream without fear. By the time he was 2, he rode a pony across the pasture with his arms outstretched like wings. Silas watched him one morning as snow dusted the hills. He stood with a hand resting on Ayesha's shoulder while she braided her son's hair with bits of thread and wildflower stems. "Do you believe in ghosts?" Cedar asked once, eyes wide. Ayesha smiled. "I live with one," she said gently, and she didn't mean Clara. Not entirely, because love leaves behind more than echoes. It shapes the wind. It carves new paths where fire once burned. And it turns broken cabins into homes. That winter, Silas found himself carving again, not spoons, but toys. Tiny horses, little cedar trees. He'd leave them on the schoolhouse steps for the children. Ayesha pretended not to notice, but the smile that tugged her lips said otherwise. One morning, Ayesha brought him Clara's last journal, the one she'd never shown him. Inside were entries not about the ranch or town, but about Ayesha. Her name scrawled in careful cursive. Her voice remembered in fragments. The girl she met near the Missouri. Clara had known all along the girl would return someday. "She knew about us," Silas whispered. Ayesha closed the book. "She chose us both." That night, as snow fell and the fire crackled low, they sat in silence again, comfortable, worn, and full of meaning. And Silas said softly, "I spent years trying to survive, then years trying to forget." Ayesha reached across the blanket. "You don't need to do either anymore." And in that moment, he believed her. Love, when real, doesn't arrive loudly. It comes like snowfall, gentle, patient, insistent. It doesn't erase the scars or undo the grief. But it sits beside it, builds something new around it, and reminds you that even when everything feels lost, there is still a path forward. Silas Boone thought he had buried his heart with Clara. Ayesha believed her story ended with war. But love, real love, is stubborn. It waits, it listens, and when the time is right, it returns like a wolf to its den, like a river to the valley, like a wild thing, finding its way home. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of second chances, of quiet redemption, of people worth loving despite their scars, then you belong here. Comment below. What's a moment in your life when love returned in an unexpected way? Subscribe to Whispers of the Wild West for more powerful tales of healing legacy and the fire that lives in silence. Because out here where bullets miss, hearts never do.